Hello, I'm Sora Luxon, and this is Magic Lesson 20, Housekeeping. Because one of the most important forms of magic you can do, very high magic, is to clean your house. No, really, I'm being serious. So, when you begin making headway into authentic occultic practices, one of the many things you're going to immediately notice a prevalence for, especially among adepts of the craft as you start to spend time around them, is cleanliness. And by that I mean not only personal hygiene, which is usually there as an overall trait, but also a penchant for having and being in spaces, rooms, environments of all kinds that are clean of debris and clutter. This can include outdoor environments, right? When we're in nature, because nothing can ever be clutter in nature. It's its own clean environment. There's a common characteristic of actively keeping spaces and places that we use for our magical practices clean, especially those we use the most. They're going to be washed, scrubbed, vacuumed, sensed, banished, sacrosanctified, swept, tidy, and just plain constantly in a state of calm, prepared, neat orderliness. And you'll notice that if you start to go to these environments or be around these people. Brooms will take on a whole new meaning symbolically when you start to think about this trait among magical practitioners. You're going to see just how common it is to most experienced magical practitioners. So, what is all of this constant cleanliness, right? Both mentally and physically. Because, yeah, we will follow up a dusting and a vacuuming with a good, solid, lesser banishing ritual after we do it. Why? It's actually not because magists are simply a bunch of perfectionist germaphobes, right? And what I'm going to be talking about here, I'm not talking about being fastidious or neurotically cleaning. I'm not talking about going overboard or telling other people that they should be going overboard. That's an imbalance in and of itself. That's a different subject. I'm just talking about maintaining balance and keeping a clean environment. Well, there actually is a magical reason for it. It has to do with creating for and allowing the proper flow of magical energy. It sounds simple. It is simple, but that's really what it's all about. The banishing, the dusting, the vacuuming, the mopping, the sweeping, the rituals to sanctify spaces. All of those things are about allowing the proper flow of energy because that is how magical energy functions. So it actually does really matter. In the occult, keeping your home, your areas of career, wherever you do labor, right? Any area of labor, whether it's a desk or your job, your practicing spaces, anywhere you might be doing your meditative training, yoga studios, your mind, keeping your mind free of clutter, keeping yourself clean, right? And free of any and all negative energy, whether it's in a physical space, an internal space, or a hygienic space. Keeping it free of negative energy, negative debris, whenever and however possible, that's actually a really big deal because that is how magic works. So this is noticeable in all of the major magical traditions, whether it's raking sand to make a garden of tranquility, sweeping a threshold with a broom on a daily basis, always at the ready. You'll see that broom tucked up against the doorframe, right? Sprinkling consecrated water after scrubbing every floor corner in a church or a synagogue or a temple, smudging with sage after cleaning to free non-physical planes from junk and mental planes from junk that might be sticking around after you've taken the time to do a good spider web clearing and dusting in your living room. Cleaning persists throughout the occult because it's necessary to the practice of the craft. One of the greater mysteries of the great art is the Hermetic principle of as above, so below. As within, so without. And you can refer to the playlist of Hermetic principles I've made for more info on that if you haven't listened to it already. Or you can read the Kabbalion, or you can listen to one of the many, many audio readings of this universal Hermetic law. In relation to what I'm discussing here, as within, so without, does actually functionally mean that everything going on and existing around you, outside of you, is actually a glyph. It's a portrayal of what's going on inside of you. A chaotic environment is usually evidence of a chaotic mind. If a person's environment is messy and disorganized, chances are more than likely, not always, not 100% of the time, but nearly 100% of the time, their mind is going to be the same way. It's going to be just as messy and just as disorganized. I'm throwing the nearly in there because there is such a thing as subterfuge, right? There is such a thing as glamours. But generally speaking, if you aren't currently engaged in some arcane adept fencing match of wills with another high magic arcana practitioner who's disguised themselves in their environment, then generally the majority of people are very easy to read and can be read in this way, with their environment passively reflecting their internal state of selfdom. Everything external of your form that's outside of your body, your environment, it's a symbolic reflection or representation, if you will, of what's going on inside of your mind and body. Now, this might sound a little bit strange, right? It's a little bit more of that, ooh, magical weirdo talk, but it's actually very common sense. The occult is nothing if not the use of good sense. So you can think of it this way. When someone's really depressed and they turn the lights off and curl into a ball and leave used dishes scattered around them because they don't want to move or clean up after eating, right? That's an overt and obvious example of an environment matching the internal state of being of the person manifesting that environment. Now, not everybody behaves that way when they're sad, and that's just a description of a singular scenario that I'm giving you. But if you're imagining it, you can clearly comprehend how that external space around that individual is representative of the internal space that they're also occupying. See, when you break magic into simple explanations, it makes a world of sense. We've all seen this sort of thing, right? We've all come into contact with that, and we can easily understand it. In the same way that people who are often in a state of uncaring for themselves psychologically or emotionally are also going to reflect that by ceasing to care for their bodies physically, either by mistreating them with chemicals, right? I don't think you're going to find many abusive drug addicts that are going to say that they feel good about themselves. At least not when they're not using. You can abuse a body with unhealthy foods. People will do that if they're unhappy with themselves or unhappy with others. If they're in an internal state of turmoil, sometimes people can become woefully unhygienic. People who don't feel good often show that directly to the world exterior to themselves by allowing their physical bodies to look and feel bad as well. Now, again, that isn't always the case, but very often it is. Everything healthy in nature cleans itself in some way or another. So here's another example of this, right? Animals clean themselves. You can't find a wild animal that isn't going to remove feathers that are damaged or lick away dirt that gets on its fur. Trees drop decay and regenerate by shedding leaves. Even viruses will free themselves of debris clogging up their data systems. As above, so below. Why do we pick things up off of a floor that someone might stumble over? We're doing it so that we don't trip, so that we don't stumble, right? Why do we keep recuperative and healing environments such as spas and hospitals, as clean as we can. Yeah, exactly. Why are monks so clean? Why are those robes so pristine and well washed? Why are they doing laundry every day? Why all the big open spaces inside of a monastery? For the mind and body to find harmony. Exactly. See, it's everywhere. Housekeeping in the occult. It's absolutely everywhere, and it's prevalent through all the skills and systems. Why do people partake in baptisms? What do you think a baptism is, right? It's a symbolic washing, a symbolic cleansing. What color does a bride wear in North America before sealing herself to another person, right? It's white, it's spotless, it's pristine. Why the ritual bathing in the Ganges River of India? All occult forms of cleanliness. People who have a healthy internal environment are generally going to reflect a healthy external environment. They feel good about themselves psychologically and emotionally, and it tends to show. They take care of themselves well, and they look as balanced externally as they are internally. Again, this isn't always the rule, there are exceptions, but generally that persists. These are obvious examples that we can all recognize as relevant. But the principle extends further, and the hidden knowledge, the mystery knowledge, is that it extends further. For instance, with synchronicity, you can see how a magic practitioner's environment is going to reflect back to them those things which are going on internally, even maybe when they aren't consciously aware of what's going on inside of themselves. In my experience, this is why neophytes are generally so impressed by synchronicity when it starts popping up, when they begin to allow it to be noticed. Things within their environment that have gone way too long ignored, perhaps, will begin repeating a patterned message to them over and over and over again, and they find it pretty amazing. Sometimes in the oddest ways, these messages will be represented, especially at first, because the environment must use emblems, the comparisons that are available for it to use in order to convey the message that an individual is now capable of receiving. As within, so without. Those who are well acquainted with the occult, well acquainted, well experienced, the alert, who are fully apprised of the power of Hermetic law, we can easily get signs, discrete insights, if you will, omens, if you prefer the old words. Those are easy for an adept to receive because we are alert. We are paying attention to our environment, our external territory, along with our internal habitation. We're just attentive to it, and so it feeds us information. Your surroundings will tell you things if you listen. Again, as within, so without. Adepts also tend to know that the Kabbalic sphere, which rules over the subconscious, is also in control of organization, order, form, and structure. So it's good to keep those two working in alignment. But I'll explain that more eventually when I get around to doing a Tree of Life podcast for everybody to listen to. And I'll probably go into way too much detail. Your subconscious has these abilities in place already. There really is a biofeedback loop. You are only going to see and access things in the ways you can see and access them because you are you. So however your individual mind creates, stores, interprets, filters, gives itself information, however your mind does that in specific ways that are then interpreted completely uniquely to you and your own lens, well, that's how that's going to happen. That's the only way it can happen. That's the only vessel it has to work with. And yes, you have the skill, as does everyone, of manifesting things into your reality. That is what your reality is. Your manifestation of what you are interpreting it as being. But the conscious mind is only half the show. It's really less than half. But again, I'll have to get into that in some other lesson. Magic has a lot to say on that. My point is, there's also this whole subconscious mind that you have no direct access to. And it's manifesting and interacting with your reality as well. And it absolutely has the ability to use symbols, signs, subtle comparisons, environmental metaphors, patterns, signals. It has the ability to use all of those in order to not only get your conscious attention, but also then to convey information to your consciousness that your consciousness would not otherwise have had access to. And you're probably not going to be able to see any of those things that your subconscious is trying actively to present to you if you're in a dirty environment, whether physically, externally, or internally and mentally. In a previous YouTube podcast, I discussed how magical energy is a circuit, that there's a loop, and it's a closed loop, right? What you do is going to return onto you. You can apply this information, this closed circuit of magical energy, to an understanding of Hermetic law, as within, so without. If your environment, say your residence, whatever it might be, your room, your apartment, your home, if it's full of stuff, clutter, things that you've been holding onto that you don't use or need, it's probably safe to say, from an occultic perspective, that you are hindering new things from entering into your life in a myriad of other ways. Because by holding on to the unnecessary and taking up space with it out here, externally, such an individual is going to be hindering themselves internally in the same ways, and therefore is also likely interfering with magic's flow through them and through their life. If you want a nice, open, clear path for energy to flow correctly, because that's how energy works best, right? Energy works best if you're not blocking its path or cluttering it up with stuff that's going to slow it down and hinder it. If you do that, energy will be hindered, right? Again, this is common sense. So, when you're working with magical energy, you got to get the stuff out of the way, right? Occultists clean up and clean out the junk and debris and clutter, because that's how you make room for the better and important things to enter into you or into your life, even down to allowing magic to just work with you and your life. So, housekeeping, get on it. There's a reason for it. You should be doing it, right? Along with your banishing rituals, if you're doing those, you should always be keeping your ritualistic spaces clean, whatever they are. And this is why there's this great occult reason for it, this necessary fundamental reason for it. Like I said right at the beginning, cleaning is one of the most powerful forms of occult magic that you can do. Clean your space up, clear that negative energy out of there. Until next time.